CyberArray for Teams was built to help organizations stay ahead of today's evolving threat landscape and to meet today's most difficult security challenges. Fortune 500 companies like Amgen, Booz Allen Hamilton, Plexus, CVP, Fannie Mae, and Vizio, small businesses worldwide, and several branches of the U.S. military use CyberArray for Teams to close the skill gaps that put their organizations at risk and to equip their workforce with the skills to defeat their security adversaries. CyberArray for Teams. Problem solved. Visit cyberarray.it/solved to solve your training problems. You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Cybercriminals are opportunistically targeting industries that continue to operate full tilt during the coronavirus shutdowns, and their attacks have grown more sophisticated. Given this shifting landscape, taking the appropriate countermeasures becomes paramount. Mimecast Email Security 3.0 helps you evolve from a perimeter-based security strategy to one that is comprehensive and pervasive with cyber resiliency in mind. From the company that stops at nothing to block cyber threats, Mimecast is offering a fully featured 90-day web security service. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register for upcoming webcasts. Today, actually, we'll learn how to build an integrated security platform with Mimecast. On November 5th, Deep Watch will show you how to build proper metrics and key performance indicators. And on November 12th, Secure Circle will show you why you should stop trying to discover and classify data. This segment is sponsored by CrowdStrike. To learn more about CrowdStrike, visit securityweekly.com/CrowdStrike. And because I haven't said CrowdStrike enough, joining us from CrowdStrike, as my teleprompter goes south, is Alexi, I should say, Papaleonardos. He's the Cloud Incident Response Manager at CrowdStrike, where he leads the Cloud Security Strategic Advisory and Cloud Incident Response programs. He's led incident response remediation and coordinated ejection of several major nation-state breaches of high-profile organizations while at CrowdStrike. Prior to joining CrowdStrike, Alexi was a senior security engineer at Netflix and the principal cloud security architect at Sony PlayStation. Alexi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Nice to be here.
Sorry, that was a lot of talking in the beginning. I said CrowdStrike at least a dozen times. It's just really funny. But it's nice to have you. Your background is primarily in Amazon AWS, and I love the opportunity to pick your brain at any point in time to talk about how we attack and defend cloud infrastructure, because there's not too many people with your level of experience. So.
Yeah, it's a fun one. I think a lot of times folks who do a lot of cloud stuff stay in cloud and don't do as much security. So the overlap between security and Amazon and incident response it tends to be a bit of a small number in the end.
Mm. So you worked on Jen's team at CrowdStrike, right? Analyzing the attackers in your previous roles as well. I guess I want to hear from you, like, what are we seeing today in terms of how people and attackers are going after our cloud infrastructure? What types of attacks are we seeing? What are the trends you're seeing today?
So a lot of the incidents that we're seeing are relatively low sophistication. It's techniques that maybe a lot of threat actors could use. And what's a little bit of a distinction to be made there is that you have a lot of more mature organizations that still have a business unit or a division they acquired or that they're spinning off, which has sort of limited insight into security settings in the cloud. And as a result, they're getting compromised through techniques that are essentially unchanged since AWS, like EC2 era, like so going back quite a few years.
Yeah, so I'd venture to guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we're seeing infrastructure leverage to conduct denial of service attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, maybe crypto mining, and probably just data leakage across things like S3 and similar things. Those still like the top. I would classify those as largely not very sophisticated, I should say.
Yeah, that's right. I can't say I see a lot of DDoS stuff these days,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely the crypto mining is a huge one. And then just general data exfil, so open exposed S3 buckets or credentials that are stolen to then access the stuff in S3. Yeah, very, very large number of cases in that area.
Yep. Matt?
Yeah, and it goes back to basic vulnerability management and misconfiguration, right?
Yeah.
I think that's where the holes still are in the cloud environment as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. So some of the cases that we see are where API keys were stolen out of CI/CD services or out of source code control systems that were supposed to be private, and then those keys tend to have been like not locked down by IP address. Of course, there's no MFA, and I think those are two options that could have been used to prevent those keys from like being used to cause harm. And then, of course, they could have been rotated in some other cases as well. In some cases, you have keys that got out and no one really knows who had them,
Mhm.
or you can't really pinpoint who had the key because so many people had access.
Right.
And so those are less mature practices. You know, they're still out there, even for an organization who has like a world-class SOC and pretty good handle on their on-prem or workstation type assets.
Yeah, I find it interesting, Alex, and what you're kind of alluding to is that the security of cloud infrastructure now is that not ignored, but not as much of a focus in your global security program for your organization. You know, much like I think of other areas that might fall into that category when we talk about attacks on firmware, I think cloud is probably right up there with it in terms of being a very real threat, and attackers can do some stuff and profit from it, and being largely weak in that area and not having the focus.
Yeah, absolutely. So directors of security, CISOs might know a lot about Active Directory or a lot about like the need for MFA and the need for securing their email protocols and their email environments, all sorts of stuff like that. But for a lot of folks, the cloud is like kind of newer and maybe a bit of a source of discomfort, and maybe they're just trusting that the DevOps type teams that are running their cloud operations pretty much have it together. It's just a very amorphous concept for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, and I think it's that shift, right? Because the cloud infrastructure may not be owned or spun up or managed by the traditional security folks because it's sitting over in the DevOps team or the cloud ops team. So part of the challenge I think here is the shift of who kind of controls and owns some of those cloud assets. It's not your traditional IT group. Therefore, who's really responsible for it, right?
Yes, they're not as so. The traditional security folks are more used to working with traditional engineering and security groups and IT groups, and so as a result, the cloud is this sort of thing where it's kind of like the old saying about looking for your keys where the light is better instead of where they actually might have been dropped. So like some folks are just not as comfortable working in that newer environment.
It's interesting. I feel like we've always been in this place, right? When we first started having to implement some security, it was about firewalls and intrusion detection. And that still maintained a focus when the attackers were focusing on the clients. And then it became anti-phishing and things to protect the client. And now we're kind of moving into the cloud and we're still behind. I always feel like the attackers are somewhat outpacing us in a very general kind of sense, where the awareness lags behind what the attackers are actually doing.
Yes, it's. I think it's interesting here because this takes me back to like my first job in security as a student, where the attackers were in some cases just trying to do pretty corny stuff like upload video, like stolen videos or wares to university assets, and these were systems that had like, Paul, you know the whole story, like public IP addresses on like a tunneling electron microscope or something like that, right?
Yep.
So now what we have is organizations are lagging behind in their embrace of cloud security, and threat actors are doing, I don't want to say really doing organizations a favor, but attackers that are spinning up crypto mining operations are eventually getting the attention of their victims, and that's like a lot nicer way to be woken up to the fact that your cloud security is lagging than like a massive breach or like destruction of a lot of data.
And I love that, Alexi, because if we plug that into a very simple risk formula, the likelihood and probability, if you have cloud infrastructure, that someone's going to attack it in this way is pretty high. But the attacks we're seeing, the impact is really low, and that's raising visibility of where we need to shore up some of our defenses.
Yes, some would call it a free pen test.
Yeah, right. And this was our experience when the first time we shifted to the cloud, right? We left the Docker API exposed, and at that time it was DDoS. Now it's more crypto mining. Completely agree there. And it raised awareness within our own organization to go, oh yeah, we really need to apply security techniques to cloud infrastructure, but it's different, right? It's different from trying to protect the clients. It's different from trying to protect traditional network infrastructure. Alexi, what are some of those major differences when people have to go through this mindset kind of shift?
I think a big one is the ephemeral nature of a lot of cloud workloads. So, in the old days, you might go through and go to do a bunch of service hardening on one host that you would carefully groom and treat nicely because it was your favorite server. And now that server should be terminated after 2 hours or 24 hours. And it shouldn't, all the configuration should be locked down ahead of time. And that is a big shift for folks who are imagining they can use legacy licensing models and legacy vulnerability management to identify what sort of security problems they have in their cloud assets. And then what about for folks that are only used to doing security assessments on servers, and they go to their DevOps team, and the DevOps team sort of wisely says, well, we don't have servers.
Right. Yeah.
Who wants a server? We just have, containers, we have Lambda, we have functions as a service, and we can't be bothered with that stuff. Get out of here, grandpa, stuff like that.
Yeah, I was curious, Alexi, are we seeing the shift away from EC2 instances and infrastructure as a service to more of the platform types attacks? Is that just like the DevOps team is saying, look, I don't need a server anymore. Are we seeing the attacks also shift to these new platform as a service types of offering like Lambda and ECS and EKS and all those different flavors that the cloud providers have?
Definitely the container venue is being exploited by threat actors. So malicious containers or access to spins up containers like a Kubernetes API server, API endpoint, or consoles, that sort of thing. Stuff with Jenkins, you can launch. You can do a lot of really cool stuff with Jenkins. So threat actors are finding open Jenkins console or semi-open that they store credentials to, and then spinning up their own workloads. And in a lot of cases, it is crypto mining, but sometimes there's other stuff too, but more insidious. So yes, absolutely, those legacy workloads, attacks on legacy style workloads are not disappearing, but threat actors are already beating the security community as a whole in attacking those sort of new types of offerings.
I think it really comes down to the authentication and authorization of the services. And I'm not sure how we lost sight of that pushing up into the cloud, whether it's just complexity or whether it's just lack of understanding of the full technology stack, that we end up with these services out there that a lot of the attacks that you were kind of alluding to and that I've seen in Docker security, right? You set up a registry and great, plugs into our CI/CD pipeline, but where's the authentication and authorization for that to prevent someone from uploading something malicious or taking something out, putting their malicious code in it and putting it back?
I think a lot of really smart people, as they're going through their cloud journey, it's something that's so new that they probably have a sense that I'm uncomfortable, I'm probably making a mistake, this isn't quite right. But when it just doesn't completely fall apart on them, they think, oh, well, I guess it sort of magically works, and they have to blow away some of the dust and cobwebs or the mist of ignorance and confusion as they come to understand how things really work, especially in IAM and authorization, IP addresses, whitelisting, or allow listing, all that sort of stuff. So there's a learning curve for security professionals as much as for anyone else in IT and engineering. And during that transition phase, there's a good chance you're going to forget about something, you're going to make a mistake, and then something's going to be left open after a temporary rule being opened in order to allow you to troubleshoot and test something. And that's how folks are getting in a lot of times.
Mm. It's interesting. In terms of protection, people think of CrowdStrike traditionally as endpoint security, but there you've got a whole product suite now that is talking about cloud security. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So though I mercifully don't have to sell any products, I'm not much of a salesman. I believe they just announced our cloud workload protection, or our cloud security posture management offering has sort of become formalized as Falcon Horizon. So that is, I think, and I don't want to offend my friends that work at or started some of the other CSPM companies. It's pretty neat because I think it has better prioritization of alerts for like, here's what you really need to fix right now, not like some compliance stuff. Because when you plug in a CSPM, you're going to see like thousands of pages of homework to work on. That's not going to get done for the most part. But with Falcon, that's going to be linked to the other insight we give you into your estates or your environments. And it's going to help you prioritize on stuff that's really baked into our knowledge about how breaches happen in any organization and in the cloud. So you'll get better prioritization, I think, out of the CSPM offering that we have there. And then the other one that's on its way, there's a lot available right now with the Falcon endpoint product, both on the run it yourself infrastructure as a service, hosted container operations, and also speaking is Amazon terms, Elastic Container Service and Elastic Kubernetes Service. So when you run the Falcon agent on those hosts there, even though Amazon is generally managing those EC2 instances for you, anywhere where you're running like Docker, like container operations in those namespaces and stuff, Falcon is able to generate new container insight events, and those go into your Falcon console. And so as long as you have that code enabled or that feature enabled in your account, you get access to all that data. And I think it's honestly so cool when you get to see like an attack, inside a container, and exactly what container it came from and everything, just right there because you're running Falcon.
Do I have to put something inside of each of my containers, or is it an integration with my cloud provider?
It's like integration at the cloud provider level. So and I'm not a sales engineer, but you'll run it when you launch or after you've launched your EC2 container or EC2 host where you're running your containers.
Right.
And then, for a truly like serverless environment like Fargate, there's another way to do it. It's sort of like a sidecar where you build something on the side.
That's really cool. I want that actually.
Right. Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, because with ECS, I think you still control the EC2 instances, kinda. You still have some level of control over them.
Yeah.
So the ability to add Falcon in there to get that visibility at the kernel layer helps you in the container environment. It's Fargate that gets a little interesting when you fully abstract it away.
Right, because there's no host to SSH into. You can't run any of your own code at the host level.
Right. Yeah, and then Lambda's even further abstracted from that. So do you provide visibility into Lambda in those other kind of cloud native services?
I think that they have some indicators of misconfiguration, and from the services side, we can also help you search for any nasty stuff that's snuck in. For example, like non-default versions of Lambda functions. And I think there's some mischievous stuff that is done at the Lambda layer as well. There's something called Lambda layers. So you can cram malicious code in there. But if you go in and look at it yourself, you're probably going to look at the latest version or the default version. And then you might be looking at code which is normal, but there's a Trojan other version that's out there that can be triggered. But there's like a million ways to trigger a Lambda function in AWS. So we see that as a kind of persistence method, among other things.
Yeah, that's really interesting how it plays into Lambda, because there are ways. I've looked into Lambda a little bit, and there's like ways you can shove stuff into your Lambda function, the binaries and other stuff. So you would kind of alert on that if wacky stuff was happening with Lambda.
Is it the quote from Halvar Flake about it's like programming it? It's just like programming a machine, but this one's a weird machine.
Yeah. I'd say that's accurate from what I've researched so far about Lambda. And what is there attacks that you're seeing that are going after cloud native stuff, or is it mostly? It sounds like it's still based on the container aspect and not so much of those cloud native or functions as a service.
That's right. It's more at the container level. If it's not just traditional like computer, something that resembles a computer workloads.
Right. Well,
and a lot of the attacks sophistication level, as we were saying earlier, is not that high, but we've certainly seen some nation state level attacks that show more sophistication. It's very impressive to me and it's a dead giveaway when you see stolen credentials used and then they immediately go for what they're looking for and steal it in 60 seconds because they already had a copy of the source code, or they had already done surveillance in the environment using other credentials that weren't particularly powerful. And then once they have the access they need, they just immediately grab it. Because as much as an advantage it is for defenders to see, like, here's exactly every instance that we have, here's every security group and every open rule that we have, the attackers can use the same thing. So they can do some, programmatic analysis of your environment and find a path to get to what they want. And then sometimes we see them get it. And it's too bad, but it's also a beauty to behold.
Mm. And it's interesting how a lot of it is abusing or leveraging the infrastructure because they want to leverage your resources, right? Go back to the university example. Many of the attacks that we saw were people just leveraging the compute power and bandwidth that universities had, because usually university had larger bandwidth than everyone else. And oftentimes the motive that I saw was they're really just trying to leverage our resources in terms of computing and bandwidth. We're seeing and I also see this too with like vulnerable WordPress. If you look at most of the like phishing attacks, like your average phishing attack, a lot of the times I trace it back to, they hacked into someone's vulnerable WordPress server just to be able to store some of their payloads and scripts that would execute because they needed a URL, and that was an easier path. But now we're seeing that in cloud infrastructure where they're breaking in, not necessarily to steal the data, but they want to use your compute resources in the cloud provider.
Yeah, there are certainly cases where, and it's horrible to see, but the attackers have gotten some keys and they want to spin up as many crypto miners as they possibly can, and they hit a limit. And so in some cases, instead of just letting that run for a few days or weeks without being detected, they go ahead and just delete other jobs that are running that aren't there. So they delete a whole bunch of other EC2 instances. It's taking data with it sometimes. I mean, it's like clear cutting like an old growth forest because you wanted to like start a fire to heat up a can of ravioli. I mean, it's like so incredibly wasteful. Right. And I think the amount of money that was made by crypto mining was like $2.73. It was like something so minuscule, and the cost was really enormous. And it's just really sad because a lot of those things are avoidable if the organization had been able to get their CSPM out there and gotten attention out to the full extent of their cloud estates, and then took a few like high priority actions to limit the impact.
Right. Yeah, and one of the difficult things in cloud infrastructure is the asset management. Like you said, Alexi, a lot of this stuff is ephemeral. Are there effective strategies you've seen enterprises adopt because so that they can get an asset inventory or some kind of running asset inventory of what's in the cloud infrastructure?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit about letting go. So you have to shift your model and think about the fact that the workloads are going to be changing. And so you just don't expect to try and like patch that server as it's running. So something more like an immutable golden image model where the image has to be at a good patch level. And then if it's not anymore, then it's going to be deleted and destroyed and replaced with like a more up-to-date one with like, up-to-date software and everything. So inventory processes that are more like about like, what are you looking to secure, what settings you're looking to have, as opposed to like what servers do I have and how do I fix them? It's like a reparameterization of that like whole like cycle, and I think that works. Organizations that are succeeding have done that pretty well. So again, like empowering the developers has worked out well, as long as security is there to guide them or light a fire or whatever. Trust but verify.
Right.
So I guess aspects of golden image have come back to be important here, right? Is that my image has to be solid because that I can spin up n number of times. So it's more about those images. And I also think the other interesting part is the infrastructure as code components that are being used to spin this infrastructure up. I see that as the kind of the next evolution of where we have to get better control around, because if there's misconfigurations in there, you want to try to catch it before you spin it up, not after you spin it up.
Yeah. So folks, you see stress or misalignment between groups, between like a security group and like a DevOps team, because security groups want certain things, secured or access restricted and so forth. But if they're too much of an obstacle, the DevOps team, I think, is going to like sort of stop responding or stop working with them. And of course, that will end poorly. But what you can do instead is come to understand, if you're a security practitioner, how can I work with a DevOps team? And like, so let's work together to change the way you're, approving your Terraform changes, so that we can get something that won't keep leaving these servers open to the internet or this API interface open to the internet. It's about, I think for the security practitioner, it's about keeping the end goal in mind and making the situation, like basically addressing the situation at the way it really is, as opposed to the way you wish it would be. So you might like to be used to being to running, you might be used to running all your agents on endpoints, and the DevOps type teams don't really want that, but they can do a pretty good job of security. So if you work with them, you actually get good results in the end.
It comes back to communication and process. Sounds like it's even more important when we talk about it in the context of cloud security.
Yeah, so if you can't speak the language of the team that's been doing this, whether for 3 months or 3 years and doing a lot better than you're going to come in there and you're not going to sound very educated, and that's not going to help you. Where if you can do some of these free trainings that are out there, look, it's a blessing and a curse. It's a disaster for organizations that have these cloud assets that are on someone's personal credit card or business credit card that's being reimbursed every month. But so that can be bad. But then if it's escaping security awareness, security notice. But by the same token, you can do the same thing with your own card. So you can start it up, and there's basically no excuse. You can if you have time, you can there's no 6-month acquisition cycle for you to understand how something works. And the training's right there, the labs are there, so you can. A lot of people can become relatively cloud experts pretty fast, at least with the passing knowledge, and be able to do a better job than they would have done, like a weekend earlier.
Mm-hmm. Paul did that.
I did. Yeah, I did. I still do that, right? You just kind of take pockets and you're like, well, what if I was to deploy this thing and this technology, right? And so I did, like Amazon Light Sail. Like, oh, that was a fun, interesting exercise. Then I did ECS. And I'm like, well, that was kind of cool. Kubernetes will be next.
Yeah,
that's a little more time, I think. There's a lot more terminology there to wrap your brain around before you can get started, I think, is what I found.
Yeah. You never forget your first time with Kubernetes.
Yeah, I'll get there. It's on my list, short list. Alexi, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
It's a pleasure.
I like the lesson of communication and process and learning. I think that's a great starting point. You feel like, how do I get a handle on all this stuff? I think that's probably a great place to start, right? So I'm glad we ended on that note. For folks that want to learn more about CrowdStrike and any of the products, including their cloud security, visit securityweekly.com/CrowdStrike. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. We'll see you next time.